Hi, everyone, and thank you for being with us today. Thank you for joining this very first Cynomi Launch and Learn. As you all know, Cynomi is the leading VC platform provider, and we really believe that every organization deserves a CISO or a VCISO. This is our first Launch and Learn, and we're so glad to host Mike Wilkes here. Mike will delve into the Change Healthcare Ransomware Incident, he will tell all of us, MSPs, MSSPs, how we can learn from it. As we all know, ransomware is a huge problem. It's a problem we must be proactive about, and we want to talk about how to do that today. Mike Wilkes, who is going to lead this discussion, is a seasoned cybersecurity expert from the security agency. Mike was a CISO in many types of companies and has expertise in safeguarding organizations across diverse sectors. He will guide us through these insights from the Change Healthcare Ransomware Incident, and we'll share the details about the incident. We'll talk about areas for improvement and offer ideas on what you can do to enhance your defenses against such threats. Mike, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, and welcome those that are dialed in live, and also greetings to those that are watching the recording later. It's nice to have this opportunity to reflect on this pretty disruptive ransomware incident. And we're not here to shame. We're not here to, cause grief. Everyone is going to be a victim of a ransomware breach at some point, right? The mantra is it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And we can speak about things like breach cadence. But I'd like to introduce myself a little bit and then get into the agenda. So one of the things we wrote up in preparing this discussion was an abstract, and so I just wanted to share that with you in case you hadn't read it. Our collective resilience is going to be improved when we share threat intelligence and when we perform lessons learned discussions like this after impactful discussions and impactful disruptions caused by ransomware in any industry or sector. So it doesn't necessarily matter too much that it was a healthcare disruption, although that certainly had an outsized impact, as we'll find out. This session is meant for MSPs and MSSPs to review the core considerations when preparing for and handling ransomware events with your clients. And the following topics, I think Rhoda mentioned, we're going to talk about some of the details and timeline of the incident, what might have been done differently. And this is not necessarily second guessing the security programs of these organizations, Change Healthcare, or their parent Optum, or their parent United Health Group. But in general, just thinking about how we best work ahead of boom. And then, of course, as a service provider, how you can be protected against similar attacks for your clients. And then best practices for actually handling a ransomware attack. So a little bit about myself. I've been doing cybersecurity for a very long time, but it wasn't actually, there were no CISOs back, 30 years ago when I was building infrastructure for the internet. So I have the distinction of having launched Starbucks.com, for example, back in 1998. I ran the DevOps team in San Francisco back in the roaring 20s of my generation, I like to call it, when the sky was the limit and the internet was going to make everything beautiful and knowledge and information wanted to be free and it would be a utopia. Of course, we now know it didn't really pan out that way. But I graduated UW-Madison class of 90, and then I got my master's from Stanford University in 91. So I've been around since before some of you were born, probably on this call. I gave PlayStation their first, or no, not their first, but for the PS2, helped launch PlayStation.com in the year 2000. I also wrote a book for Cisco Press in 2002 for a certification that no longer exists, actually, called the Internet Solution Specialist. And I've created a mobile virtual network operator for Rabobank when I lived and worked in Amsterdam, designed and built Rabobank's direct banks as well as their trading floor, which is about a 25 million euro project. Once in every 10, 20 years, people do these kinds of refreshes, and I got to build and design that. Ran, what else? ING's DR infrastructure when I lived in Amsterdam. Moved back to the US and took up a role with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the CME. And we had about 10,000 servers there and $2 quadrillion in contracts traded back in 2014. So these are significantly important financial institutions, CFIs as they're called. And so I've done big scale and small scale. What else? We had, I think, like I said, $2 quadrillion in contracts, which is a number that's not used very often. It's 1,000 trillion. And then, of course, head of DevOps. One of the stories, many of the stories that I like to tell as a security professional, or from my time when I was the head of security at Marvel. And I like to joke it was my job to keep Iron Man safe. That's a good tagline. I'm sticking with it. And if you saw Infinity War or Endgame after, what happened to poor Iron Man after I left. I was not there to protect him. But that, kind of joke aside, I'm an adjunct professor teaching cybersecurity at NYU. I'll be teaching a course at Columbia University as well this fall in enterprise risk management. So basically, I'm teaching CISOs how to be security professionals and CIOs as well. I'm a member of the World Economic Forum in the Quantum Security Working Group, which is a pretty super sexy topic, maybe for another time when we can talk about quantum machine learning, which would be like a double or quadruple hype cycle, I think. But currently, I'm building a security practice for the security agency, and we are a vCISO practice. So we're providing, fractional CISOs to MSPs and small and medium-sized businesses, and we want to make sure that everyone has the guidance of a security professional who can help them with their strategic planning. And we use the Cynomi platform for that, and so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to collaborate on this Lunch and Learn. So I think enough about me. I love doing this, like I said, and have been a CISO for several organizations, including ASCAP. I don't think I put the ASCAP logo on here. No, I didn't. The association, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. I'm an ASCAP musician. I play drums. I'm a jazz musician, and that's one of my passions as well. All right, so into the agenda. Let's take a look at the breach timeline. Let's think a little bit about what might have been done differently or how we can think differently about breach and failure and attacks. Some of the lessons learned for MSPs, but of course, anyone in any sector can learn from this event. And ransomware event best practices, and then a little bit of Q&A at the end. I think we should be able to gather some questions from the comments area. Looks like Bob Henderson's on the call. Thank you. Stefan Lesseroux, thank you as well. Joshua, also on the comments. So feel free to throw them in there and we'll pick them up at the end as I move through this content. All right, so let's start at the beginning. This is a revenue snapshot for 2023 figures. So United Health Group, $371 billion in revenue. Optum, $226 billion. Change Healthcare, a measly $884 million on the books for 2023. And of course, this visualization of these circles, of concentric circles, is not drawn to scale. Actually, I just wanted to bring something in that looked like the Netflix series Three-Body Problem logo. And my slide notes, you don't have to take screenshots. I'll happily send you a copy of them with the notes and the links later. At the end, I have a QR code, which is a mail to tag, to allow you to do that. So you can just pay full attention, not have to worry about grabbing screenshots. And so basically, UHG owns Optum. Optum owns Change Healthcare, and they purchased it for $13 billion in October of 2022. I think it's notable that the acquisition was actually announced in January of 2021, with the expectation that it would close in the second half, June or so of 2021. So there were delays in sorting out the paperwork. And this is what I would call a fourth-party breach event for UHG, and a third-party breach event for Optum. As one might suspect, that integration of the acquired company can take several years to implement. At the CME, it took several years for us to integrate fully the Chicago Board of Trade, for example. And I was there when it finally was fully integrated and the infrastructure had been properly, harmonized. So I think that's likely one of the cases, in this situation where maybe the Change Healthcare laptops and workstations had actually not yet been brought into the unified EDR and MDR, right? Endpoint detection and response and managed detection and response monitoring when the incident occurred. Now, of course, this is speculation, but it's based on experience. And they, of course, Change reported it to their internal team and to the health ISAC. And if you're not familiar with the national ISACs, they're information sharing and analysis centers. They're industry based. I think there's 27 of them right now, and one of them is for healthcare services. And I believe most of the major players are members of the HISACs. I've presented threat intelligence briefings there. I've been a member of about a dozen ISACs over the years, and they're really great communities of practice and sharing of information. And of course, the Health ISAC helped report it to the FBI and to CISA and to OCR, right? The Office of Civil Rights for Health and Human Services, which influence HIPAA and other types of regulatory oversight. And then, of course, it had to be reported to their cyber insurance carrier and to their board of directors, who eventually, of course, agreed to disclose the event. Why? Because it was publicly impacting. People could tell something was wrong. So, February 21st, 2024. This is directly quoted from the Optum.com posting, which was one of the first ones that actually went up. Healthcare noticed, their notice went up later that day, but actually Optum reported it first. And they said, at 2:15 Eastern, some applications are currently unavailable. And then boom, you have a ticket, right? 0529634. So that's good. That's best practice. Make sure that if there is an incident, you begin the documentation process immediately and have that, because that will save you when you're audited and reviewed by regulators later and potentially investigated and fined. If you don't follow your run book, and if you don't have a run book, you're in trouble. So they did have a run book. They posted it. They had a process. Then the next update of interest that I put here was at 9:55 a.m. Eastern. The disruption is expected to last at least through the day. Well, that's a bit optimistic, but you're given that, I guess, when you're still scoping the problem and you don't know if it's just a disruption or if it's a massive breach that's going to cause lots of problems for weeks and months, which it turned out to be. Then at 14:09, we see they've finally tagged it as cyber issue. It's related to a cybersecurity issue. So now we actually know the direction of the disruption. It's not some sort of fiber optic outage due to a backhoe being dug through the ground outside of a data center that cuts a connection or something. And then of course, at 16:27, we took immediate action to disconnect our systems to prevent further impact. So we're talking, 14 hours and 12 minutes later, they have reached a mitigation step, and they have published and shared this information with us. So that's not bad. Although one might argue that, they probably could have done better than 14 hours to reach the something's wrong, to it's cyber, to we're taking stuff offline because we're really upset that it's going to spread. So I think it was useful, of course, to know Optum was reporting it first, because they had customer support calls, people calling in saying they couldn't buy prescriptions or get other types of system access. So basically, upstream monitoring of Change Healthcare by Optum was clued in enough and felt the need to report something because it was impacting their customers. And so I'm pretty sure they did not realize just how bad things were going to get at this point. But I have a link, like I said, to the timeline if you want to read more about it. February 26th, we now know that it's Black Cat claiming responsibility for this. February 29th, 3 days later, Change Healthcare confirms that it was Black Cat who is represented as the attacker. Now, notice the specific use of language here. They're not making factual statements and assertions. They do not know that it was Black Hat. They can know this but not want to publish it because it could be a false flag. And you don't want to make statements that you have to roll back later. Why? Because people remember the very first thing and the very last thing that they hear. And when the narrative is starting to be written, you don't want it to be off in left field and have it be completely, discredited later due to other information that comes to light. So look at that. Black Cat represented as the attacker. This is very precise language, which means they saw screens that said, hey, it's Black Cat and it's Alpha V and you're in trouble. But again, false flag operations by the Chinese pretending to be the Russians trying to pretend that it's the Chinese, or the Iranians or the North Koreans. They're all doing things to say, hey, it's the Russians attacking you, when it's not, right? They claimed that 4 to 6 terabytes worth of data was exfiltrated. So that's obviously a pattern now that we see. It's not just encrypting your data and buying the decryption key or not paying the ransom and just recovering from backups. You now have to worry about the extortion of your data being put out there on the dark web and sold to the highest bidder, which I believe will happen in 2 days from now. One of the recent updates I read was that, and we'll get to that, normally there's an affiliate and the ransomware gang. The affiliate gets about 15% of the total ransom that's paid. And in this case, Black Cat decided not to pay the affiliate. And so the affiliate said, screw you. We kept the data just as an insurance policy in case we got bilked out of our percentage. And so we're going to extort them again. And so there's actually a double extortion event happening around this. And that's really horrible for executives and health insurance providers and cyber insurance providers to think about the possibility of Black Cat doing a false exit scam, essentially, and saying, we got shut down by the FBI, so we can't pay you, when really they're just keeping all of the $20 million that they got. So one of the questions I had, though, was this exfiltration of data confirmed using NetFlow? NetFlow data is, if you're not familiar with this concept, you maybe have seen in a detective or police series, TV shows, someone's like, I want to know every phone call the suspect made between 10 p.m. and 10 a.m. the night of the Moida, right? In my best New York stereotype accent. And of course, that's call detail records, CDRs. And they go to the telco, and the telco says, yes, these calls were made. It was this many minutes between these phone numbers. But wait, don't get to know what was in that conversation. Well, the same thing is true for NetFlow data. The internet, lots of points of presence. If you're a company like Team Cymru, CYMRU, they actually have points of presence and they sell NetFlow data as a subscription. So typically, if the ransomware was discovered and kicked off on February 21st, about a week ahead of time, you can expect all of the data, all 6 terabytes, depending on how quickly they could get off of the servers, was exfiltrated to somewhere else. And you can see that, right? You can see that in the NetFlow data. You don't know what data was exfiltrated, but it should be a pretty much of an eyebrow raising experience to see 6 terabytes of data go to like a DigitalOcean server here in New York, or to a server in Singapore, or half of the data goes to various cloud service providers that the threat actors are abusing for their infrastructure. So it could be AWS, it could be Google, it could be Microsoft. It really doesn't matter. Threat actors are living everywhere these days. But that much data exiting your platform ought to have triggered some alarms. And if you don't have egress bandwidth, and the difference between egress and ingress, inbound and outbound, if you don't have sort of alarms and anomaly detections in place around egress transfers, then you're not really monitoring your infrastructure well enough to detect this kind of event and to potentially stop it as soon as it happens, because they may try to do it all in one go or try to do it low and slow over several days. Anyway, so NetFlow data. How many days before the ransomware began encrypting the data did this data theft occur? Were sample records published on the dark web as proof of life and then given to the insurance and to the investigators to show that, yes, this is your data? I do believe that all happened. And when Colonial Pipeline happened, I was actually using NetFlow data to analyze the infrastructure of Colonial Pipeline and saw 106 gigabytes get exfiltrated to a DigitalOcean server droplet here in New York. And so we called law enforcement and participated, hopefully, in the fact that that exfiltration event didn't actually happen, right? It's like somebody putting a packet of, information underneath a park bench, right, in a spy movie. You try to intercept, that packet so that someone didn't pick it up. We never saw the 106 gigs leave that DigitalOcean server. So I think that's one of the reasons why we were able to help in that situation by having access to this kind of technology and observability. Even if it's not your own infrastructure, you can still look at other people's IP addresses and see command and control signals coming into and out of the infrastructure to known bad IP addresses. Anyway, so that's a little bit about threat intelligence. What else can we do on the timeline here? March 3rd, Black Cat receives a Bitcoin payment worth over $20 million. Change, Optum, UHG do not comment on whether they paid the ransom. But this is an ostensibly publicly visible event, right? Because these wallets are known to be associated with these groups. And although Bitcoin and Hyperledger cryptocurrencies are supposed to be completely anonymizing, we now know, of course, that you can follow the money. Some larger health systems are actually bleeding more than $100 million a day at this point because of the interruption. So despite the promise of anonymity, like I said, payments can be traced and attributed. And when they go to a wallet of a known threat actor, like I said, 85% goes to the ransomware gang, 15% goes to the affiliate that provided the initial access. There is a specialization of threat actor talents and capabilities now. It's not just the gang that does it all. There are things called IABs, initial access brokers. They basically deal in patient zero credentials all the time. And the cyber criminal affiliate known as Nachi claims to have given Black Cat access to Change's network, and says that the crime gang cheated them out of their share. And sometimes the share can go up as much as 40%, depending on the revenue split that they have agreed. And they still have the sensitive data. And of course, they're now extorting them with the deadline of April 20th to pay. Otherwise, it'll go to the highest bidder on the dark web. So that's an interesting element, of course, to pay attention to, is that if you do pay the ransom, you don't want to own up to it necessarily and publish that fact because the Department of Justice can go after you. The DOJ says it's illegal to support terrorism. And if you know that this is a terrorist organization, or if you suspect that it's a terrorist organization, or at least a country, that is the recipient of the threat actors' work, is on the sanctions list, right? Which would be North Korea, Syria, Iran, and now I think Russia has been added as well to the countries listed for sanctions for supporting terrorism. There's other high-risk geographies, of course, that you can get in trouble with for paying ransom to them as well. But I won't go too much into the legality of pay or not pay in this instance. I just wanted to mention it, that it is ostensibly publicly observable whether it gets paid. And of course, the dark web website saying this is where you go to pay us, that page gets taken down when it's been paid. All right, so now we're up to March 6th, and lawsuits have begun rolling in against United Health Group over the cyber attack. And at least 5 federal lawsuits have been filed last month against the company, court records show. So the American Health Association said it'll take several weeks, if not months, for hospitals and other healthcare providers to fully recover from this attack. Moody's said that the fallout is going to affect hospitals' credit ratings as they search for alternative claims filing methods. And so I have a link to that in the chat, in the slide notes that you can get, like I said, later. And we can look at some of the details of the timeline of the attack and when these lawsuits have fired up. And of course, now, March 10th, the government has urged the company and companies to communicate about recovery efforts more frequently and with more transparency to both the healthcare system and to the state Medicaid agencies, which, to their credit, they started to do. Publish, over-communicate, don't give, a lot of details necessarily, because you don't want the threat actors to know where you are in your incident response and where you think you're reaching, the mitigation and eradication phase of incident response. But you do want to communicate frequently with your regulatories and your partners about the status of your recovery of your systems. Now we reach March 12th, and the officials within the Biden administration have summoned the United Health Group CEO, Andrew Whitty, to the White House. So this brings us to about 3 weeks into the incident. And that things are not going well when your boss's boss's boss, as CEO, is summoned to the White House. I'm pretty sure that the Change Healthcare Incident Response Plan did not contain a section that said, if summoned to the White House to discuss an incident, and then they fill in the blank of what they're supposed to do. So they're working off book at this point, right? Because it's a big deal. March 13th, the federal government launches an investigation over the attack in terms of HIPAA compliance, because, of course, millions of records are potentially exposed in this breach. March 15th, the American Hospital Association surveyed over 1,000 hospitals, and they conducted this right between March 9 and 12, so just 4 or 5 days. 3 or 4 days. And they found that 94% of hospitals surveyed have felt a financial impact from the attack, and more than half have reported a significant or serious impact. 74% of hospitals reported a direct effect on patient care. I know I was riding a bus here in New York recently, and this old lady from Belgium was getting ready to fly back to Belgium, and she had gone to the local CVS, which is a pharmacy here in New York, and she wanted to get her prescription fulfilled and renewed before she flew, and she couldn't. they said, our systems are down. And they said, well, unless, of course, you want to pay out of pocket for this medication, which, of course, she could not afford. And so it's very impactful, not just, something happening to other people, right? When you are a healthcare provider and you have this kind of concentration risk of services, millions and millions of people impacted by it. So let's talk a little bit about what could have been done differently. So I use monkeys here in an affectionate manner. We are all monkeys. We have opposable thumbs, but basically, I think of us all as monkeys, as a tribe of monkeys who abuse and use computers, to make life interesting for ourselves. And of course, what could have been done differently? Everyone, including United Health Group and Optum and Change Healthcare, should and could invest more time and attention in security awareness training. I'm not saying that we can be perfect. We're not robots. Humans will always click on things. And so let's think a little bit about why people click on them. Black Cat is known for sharing the proceeds of their ransom with the affiliates. But of course, sometimes those initial access brokers are disgruntled insiders. So if you don't have an insider risk program, or if your clients don't have the capability of knowing whether there's an intentional or accidental breach of credentials, aka bought and sold on the dark web, or someone says, hey, I'll give you, 10% of the ransom if you give me your, Change Healthcare credentials. Some people are going to pick that option. Maybe they're in a difficult situation. Maybe they are about to be fired. They're on a performance improvement program, a PIP, right? Maybe they didn't get a raise. Maybe they're not allowed to work from home. Loyalty is not huge these days with a lot of organizations. And so I think that's one of the things that ransomware groups are playing into. They're sharing some of the proceeds. I remember reading something about research in the UK. The average UK corporate employee would sell their corporate credentials for as little as $2,000 US. The folks that got bribed at Twitter that were a part of the murder of the reporter, the writer, Khashoggi, I believe they were bribed with like a Rolex watch, and that was it. So anyway, crime and greed. Phishing plays upon four things: fatigue, curiosity, vanity, and greed. If it wasn't a disgruntled insider at Change Healthcare, then how did they get lured into clicking on that phishing email? Because we know 80-90% of all breaches start with compromise through phishing. I think start of day and end of day are they present two very clear windows in the day for hapless clicks. This is what we might call decision fatigue. And of course, if you do phishing testing and you find out, people are susceptible to, clicking on things before they've had their first cup of coffee, or at the end of the day when they just want to get out the door or finish their work and go do something for their home life. This is an element that is used in terms of timing as well. And social media research, of course, plays into this on how to get people to click on phishing attacks. And so you need to be sending those types of emails every month yourself. I think that's the best practice, not once a year. The more often you do this kind of thing, the more of a muscle, memory gets built up. And if the muscle is not exercised, the skepticism muscle, then it will atrophy, and they will have, thousands of people clicking on these emails. I think curiosity, Curious George in my little panel here, is probably one of the most powerful motivators in any call to action in an email, with a promising, an inviting link or attachment. I think it was SANS.org, the security training firm themselves, got phished one summer when there was the promise of reading the bonus spreadsheet for the whole company was, quote unquote, accidentally emailed to everyone. Someone coughed up their credentials on Azure in the cloud to want to see that spreadsheet. And of course, once those credentials are given up, lots of bad things happen. Let's see what else. Vanity. This is the monkey looking in the mirror, right? Vanity is a tried and true approach as well, of course. You won't catch as many people with a vanity test for your phishing, but you can always get a few sort of big-headed personality types if the social media research is well done. Pretend they've won an award and they need to open up this document, in order to read the details. These are the kinds of tests that I have implemented, in the companies that I've led security programs for. And lastly, of course, you cannot forget that there's always financial incentives that can be relied upon to catch a few clicks for every scenario that you run with a monetary angle to the motivation to click or to download something. So it does not, mind you, of course, have to be a big amount of money. Indeed, I do think a $25 Amazon gift card is a much more plausible and inviting call to action on a phishing test than click here for a $500 gift card for most people. What else could be done differently? Well, think about mergers and acquisitions. Maybe some of your MSP clients are acquiring companies. Maybe you as an MSP are merging with another MSP or acquiring another one. And we all have due diligence processes that have to be well documented. Usually they're very secretive, of course, during the M&A phase prior to the acquisition. And I think it's after the acquisition is when we fail to take all those discovery documents and share them much more widely in order to assimilate awareness of the risk at all levels of the organization. Make sure that you have a risk register from the acquiring organization or the acquired organization, and it identifies and tracks any of their significant cyber risks. And if you don't have a risk register, you need to create one, because it's not my job as the CISO to take sort of decisions above my pay grade. That has to be elevated to senior leadership and to the board of directors potentially. So these are going to be risks that persist for more than one quarter, because the boards typically only meet once a quarter. So if the risk arises and then gets mitigated within 3-month period, it's not a board level risk, right? But anything that's going to persist for longer than 2 quarters ought to potentially be brought to their attention so they can track it. They can help deprioritize it or elevate the priority of it, depending on their governance perspective of the risk. And so when an organization that you support is considering or is in the process of acquiring another org, like I said, there's lots of risks that should be identified and documented and, where possible, mitigated. When does the back office network integration occur? In some cases, like I said, it's many years after the deal officially closes. So what kind of temporary bridge configurations are going to be spun up so that the two organizations can communicate and have Active Directory forest trusts, file shares, SharePoint, access and authorization controls, third-party tools that are using SSO. And now 2 domains need to be queried in order to see who can log in and what can they access. Does the acquired company have good asset management? Do they have good vulnerability management? If they don't have an asset management tool that's continuously updating what kinds of computers they have, what software is on them, what kind of data is on their hard drives, right, for data classification, that's a big risk, because especially if you're a healthcare company acquiring other healthcare companies and you're an MSP supporting one of these or both of these companies, you need to help elevate that risk on their behalf and help them implement tools that give them that visibility so they can at least have observability, right? You need to be able to see that these assets exist, who has access to them. Did the company that was acquired even have an EDR solution in place, right? Some companies didn't even have endpoint agents installed. Did they ever perform a ransomware incident tabletop exercise to validate their incident response plan? I do not know if Change Healthcare had ever run. I imagine they had a tabletop, but maybe things changed and they hadn't done one in a year or two. Certainly it was the case with Colonial Pipeline. This is public information. They were doing security exercises and risk assessments, and a third party said, you should probably do XYZ and it'll cost you, $200,000, $300,000. And apparently Colonial Pipeline said, that's okay, we'll go without. We don't need to spend that money. We're good the way we are, we think. And then, of course, they paid a $5 million ransom. So why do you have money for $5 million in ransom? You're kind of outsourcing your incident response and security testing to a threat actor, right? Why not pay a good, ethical hacker and red team, provider or a pen testing organization to demonstrate that you can be breached and how, and then mitigate those and spend less money overall, right? So I think that was it for this slide. Next up, here we have a picture of Atlas with the weight of the world on his back. And of course, I think that's where a lot of MSPs and MSSPs kind of envision themselves. They have all this risk for all these clients and all these assets. And sometimes the clients don't want to pay for, good security tools. So how can we identify and reduce risk? We can do it through staff education. We can do it through executive education. And I make a big distinction between the two. Staff education is running an incident response for the individual contributors who actually run incident response, right? The incident response teams. Executive education is when you run a tabletop And you don't necessarily invite all the individual contributors, right, who do help desk support and forensics and incident response. You instead put a scenario together where the board actually has to get involved, right, like this kind of breach that happened for Change Healthcare. Who is going to take the decision to disclose? And what are the criteria by which you will decide that you're going to disclose an incident as material? Certainly for SEC regulated, publicly traded companies, the new regulations that came out in December last year are now in effect for most companies. The smaller SEC organizations have until, I think, June 15th to comply. But we've already had Form 8Ks filed by them with disclosures, and Form 10Ks talking about their security programs. But the other thing you can do to identify and reduce risk is to make sure you verify your WISP. WISP is a 4-letter acronym for Written Information Security Plan. Every company should have at least 1 or 2 policy documents, a WISP and a SIRP. The SIRP is the Security Incident Response Plan, and that's your playbook, that's your run book. And if you don't test it every now and then, you're going to get in big trouble from regulatory, from cyber insurance may not pay your claim or your client's claim if you didn't follow it. And if you are the MSP or the MSSP, you're on a sort of like a double jeopardy at this point, where you're going to oftentimes be held responsible for things that the clients should have been doing. It's a shared responsibility model in the cloud, same kind of thing, with managed infrastructure. So you have to have very clear contractual language about what your domains of responsibilities are. There's an example of a MSP that's being sued in Sacramento, and they don't even have a contract with the client. It's a bunch of lawyers. Of course, the lawyers are going to sue them when they get breached. But if you don't even have a written contract, how are you supposed to know what you're responsible for? That could play both ways, right? It could make the MSP extremely exposed, or it could just say, it was just kind of a verbal agreement that we would help you with your infrastructure, and some of that included networking, and some of that included security. And of course, the lawyers all assumed that they had lovely security coverage and protections, and they didn't. And again, the shared responsibility model is something that needs to be much more communicated effectively to people in these kinds of relationships. Then TPRM, third-party risk management. You need to review the third-party providers that you use as an MSP or that your clients use for their business. And you need to monitor and review the security posture of those core providers. Okta, for example, is a security provider that does single sign-on and MFA, and they were attacked, like 3 times in the last year and breached. And it wasn't Okta's fault per se. It wasn't Okta's infrastructure that got compromised. It was third parties that provide for Okta that got compromised. But of course, Okta is the one whose name gets dragged through the mud and potentially gets sued, and brought before the SEC for various types of lack of good security hygiene. Anyway, so third-party risk, if your security is strong, awesome. But they're still going to attack your weakest link, and your weakest link is going to be one of your third parties. As we noticed, United Healthcare Group was attacked through a fourth-party risk of 2 downstream business ownership. And then, of course, advanced email protections. So I'm going to dive into each one of these a little bit to give you some sense of what goes into it. But you have to remember, risk never goes away. We never eliminate it. There's no such thing as saying, are we secure? Yes. Never answer the question. It's not a state, right? It's a process. There's no finish line, right? It's an infinite game of balancing, risk. What we talk about is trying to reach a level of residual risk that both you and your clients can accept. And so we have mitigations, we have risk transfer, we identify risk appetite, and we eliminate some risk by introducing tools and process. But don't carry the weight of the world on your MSP and MSSP shoulders. Be proactive in your work and protective in your contract language. So staff education. Provide more frequent but shorter training in order to achieve the best mindset for an organization. Once per year for 40 minutes, not as effective as 4 times per year for 10 minutes. And you don't have to pay a lot or even anything, actually, for good security awareness training. Amazon, for example, open sourced their SCORM compatible, which is a machine transferable zip file format with a manifest of security awareness training modules for learning management systems, LMS. And you can basically import it into any LMS, or you can make use of their instance. Although I recommend that companies actually make this a core knowledge management capability and download something from Moodle.org, which is an open source well supported and updated learning management package. And that way you can have it as a core competency, and you don't have to outsource it to a third party for exorbitant high costs. And you can import this 15-minute Amazon training from 2022, which covers secure communication, data classification, phishing, physical security, social engineering, data privacy, third-party application security, laptop standards, how to protect data, and acceptable use. And it's lovely. Like I said, there's a link in the slide notes to download that module and fire it up. And then other people and other teams can start making their own training, and it's all on your own infrastructure, right? So you own the content. It can't be breached necessarily as easily as it might on a third-party platform. And the lawyers in your company will appreciate the fact that you own and control the system with all of your sensitive training and knowledge. Knowledge management is a big deal for resilience and technology and security awareness. Executive education, like I said, if you don't have the budget approval to deploy a next-gen firewall or antivirus endpoint solution, sometimes hosting an executive tabletop will provide the gravitas and the awareness at the executive level and sponsorship level needed to allocate resources. So I've written and provided a webinar called Delivering Effective Tabletop Exercises. They're very powerful tools that security professionals can wield in our pursuit of risk mitigation for organizations that we serve. We all need and want to raise the bar on the ability to detect and quarantine malware, ransomware. Some threat actors, for example, can pivot from the initial compromise of patient zero and become domain admin within 18 minutes. This is a cyber threat report I think CrowdStrike published a couple of years ago. The fastest threat actors can pivot and move laterally and escalate privilege up to admin within 18 minutes. So if you scan your devices every 30 minutes, you've already lost the battle and you've already lost the war. So I think planning and executing a tabletop, with a ransomware scenario, will enlist everyone, because we need to get everyone involved, including, the board and the executive teams. That's a different message that we send to the board. WISP verification. So perform an unannounced security breach test and drill. This could be as simple as just dropping a benign file from icar.org, a simple text file that all the antivirus tools have agreed that they will flag as malicious, even though it's not, right? That's what makes it benign. And drop it on a couple of workstations and wait to see if the antivirus, quarantines it and detects it. The cybersecurity mantra here is trust, but verify. Well, guess what? Do the verify part, right? Like I said, download the iCar file a couple of times and put it places and see if people escalate it. If you have an outsourced SOC, make sure they escalate and detect it as well. Validate that your monitoring is working is what I'm saying. Verify that escalation takes place. You and your clients need to have a WISP, right? The written information security plan that's tested periodically to verify that anomalies can and will be detected. The runbook, if it exists, can help you get back up and running more quickly with confidence. Failure to plan is a plan to fail. Having a well-rehearsed WISP can also avoid regulatory fines and lawsuits as long as you review it annually and you update it to show that it was reviewed, right? You have to put new, dates and signatures and names in the document every year. And it has to match changes to your infrastructure. Like if you got rid of a tool that the client was using, maybe it was Sophos or Symantec or Carbon Black, and now you're using CrowdStrike, you're going to have to put in some updates to your runbook, right? So I've got a link to the iCar download file in the slide notes for you for later. TPRM, third-party risk management. You need to review this attack surface, like I mentioned, because it is larger than your attack surface. There's all sorts of ways to compromise. Even a company that prints your logo on a pen, they're going to send you an invoice, right? That invoice is a PDF. That PDF could have a 0-day, right? So it's not just your core tier 1 service providers that should be monitored continuously for breach events and security posture changes. Previously, I was the CISO for Security Scorecard, which is a security ratings firm. I'm an advisor there now, and I believe strongly in the insights of continuous monitoring. We have customers that are monitoring over 4,000 of their vendors continuously, and they have their finger on the pulse of the security posture of all of that third-party risk. So we know that, supply chain attacks of the last few years, Okta, MoveIt, SolarWinds, Kaseya, these are big, right? They have huge outsized impacts. I think the MoveIt breach, or at least vulnerability that led to several breaches, impacted 2,600 companies. and over 90 million individuals just from one software vulnerability on a secure managed file transfer tool. Like I said, I used to be the CISO at Scorecard. Full disclosure, that's why I talk about the beauty of being able to do this, without having like a 300 person vendor risk management team to be able to monitor 10,000 vendors continuously. Because you don't send them a questionnaire once a year. You don't send a questionnaire to Okta and say, "Hey, Okta, have you been breached in the last 12 months?" And they're like, "Yeah, we were breached, 3 times. You didn't read about it. It was kind of a big deal." And that's when you do Shields Up. No, you and your clients need to have continuous monitoring, and you only need to do the questionnaires when you see their security posture has dipped or started to lag. Anyway, so I'm here explaining this image. This is an astrolabe, which is used for ancient navigation and astronomy. And so I think about third-party risk as just being part of knowing where the North Star is and knowing where the Big Dipper is, right? These are basic fundamental navigation tools for sailors and the maritime industry. Well, the same kind of thing exists for cyber. You need to understand some of the attack vectors, like third-party risk. Advanced email protections. There's lots of configurations for Office 365 and G Suite that are not enabled by default. Lots of them. So you need to review these security features of your existing tools and periodically with your clients. Examples, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. These are configurations that you have to set up in protecting against email spoofs, which of course we know leads to a lot of clicking of phishing attacks. So make sure you have these enabled. Domain spoofing in DNS for these 3 are completely missing for the majority of firms that I've reviewed. Scorecard has something like 12 million scorecards. I would say 70% of them have some kind of either broken SPF record where they just configured it incorrectly, so it's ineffectual, or have no DKIM or DMARC set up. So in my work, like I said, nobody knows that they don't have these protections turned on. And of course, you can recommend, and I recommend, that you use secure email gateway solutions. Another one would be DLP. Data loss prevention can be turned on in G Suite, but it's not on by default. You have to go in and do it for them. So I've got links to tools that can help you. And actually, let me throw these into the chat right now as an added benefit into the comments. This is where you go to check SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. This is something you can do today for yourself and today for all of your clients to help them understand which of these tools are missing or misconfigured. And of course, it's in the slide notes for later, but I wanted to give you a little bit of an action item you can play with right away. All right, so ransomware event best practices, heading into the final stretch before we can take some questions, which I see some popping up already. That's great. Let's face it. Breaches happen all the time. We are best advised to assume breach, to assume compromise. A lot of companies are full of risk due to technical debt, selecting tools and technology that forms the foundation, but they're going to have to be reset and paved over at some point, right? They also most companies suffer from a lack of observability when bad things happen. No logs existed for a lot of the companies that were running SolarWinds when it was attacked successfully by APT29, Cozy Bear, the Russians, and they compromised the remote monitoring software called SolarWinds Orion. And a lot of companies had no idea if they were still owned by the Russians when the FBI called them up and said, "Hey, we're still seeing, command and control beaconing signals coming out of your servers towards these Russian endpoints. You should do something about that." And of course, no logs. People just didn't think they needed to turn on logging, which is a huge mistake. But what are some of the best practices? Attacker and defender life cycles. I'll do a quick slide on that. And then there's this concept in the military called boom. Left of boom is before the shit hits the fan. Right of boom is afterwards. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I think we have a prevention bias. I think we spend too much time and money on left of boom and not enough on right of boom. And if we're going to assume compromise, we're going to want to practice standing back up. Resilience is not about wringing your hands, worrying, and paying for prevention tools, which will eventually be compromised or circumvented, and saying, "Oh gosh, I hope we don't get attacked." No, just assume that you're attacked. Assume you already had one of your credentials bought and sold on the dark web, and work from there. So what is this life cycle? This comes from a presentation I attended made by Bob Lord, who entitled it, how to put breaches on your resume and live to tell the tale. At a Black Hat in August of 2021 for the CISO Summit. I gave a presentation there as well, and I loved his deck. And this slide, I got his permission to use it. Bob was the first security officer at the Democratic National Committee. He was previously the CISO at Yahoo after their breach. He was the CISO in residence at Rapid7, and now he is a cybersecurity specialist advisor to CISA. So he knows a lot, and he actually headed up Twitter's information security program as its first security hire. So this guy knows a lot about security, and he's been in to clean up a lot of other people's messes. So I have a link to Bob Lord's LinkedIn profile and to the name of the presentation from Black Hat. But basically, what he put on this was something about incident response that they don't tell you about in the typical, academic book learning, about 6 or 7 phases, right? There's the attack when the threat actors breach your infrastructure or one of your laptops or one of your accounts. But then there's another attack, which the CISO often does not survive, which is the armchair quarterback second guessing everything that had been done in the security program leading up to the breach. And so that's the one that a lot of CISOs fail to survive. They may survive the initial breach and they may run the incident closed out, but they're going to eventually get thrown under the bus and fired. And that's unfortunate that that's sort of the reason why we have an 18-month and decreasing average tenure in a company. And I think it's very disrespectful and very unhealthy. Why? Because you can't fire your way to a more secure posture. A battle-hardened CISO that's been through a breach is actually worth more than someone who's a pre-breach CISO who still believes in the value of prevention and has never actually lived through an incident and learned what's actually important. People and process. Much, much more important than tools. And that's where you as MSPs and anyone that's watching this that has an infrastructure that needs to be protected, that's where I think you should take your biggest message and takeaway. People, process, and tools in that order. Get good people, write up and practice good process, and then worry about implementation of your tools later. Left of boom. So have your breach disclosure communications written and blessed ahead of time by legal and by outside counsel. Only a few details need to be changed: the date that you became aware of it and the nature of the compromise. And so this will avoid the delay in driving the street narrative, because guess what? The internet writes that narrative for you if you are silent, and they will not be kind. Left of boom, again, verify that you have valid backups. I think there's a phrase, backups are useless, restores are golden. We need to make sure that you test and restore your backups and make sure they haven't been deleted by the threat actors. So keep your backups as far away as possible from your production environment. Use different credentials. Don't make it single sign-on. Use dual factor, multi-factor auth on those backup instances. But don't, because of insider threat, don't assume that the DevOps engineer isn't going to go rogue and delete all the backups and then encrypt all the stuff and pretend it was a breach by a third party. These kinds of internal insider threat scenarios do happen. I've talked about them and published details on them before. And prepare an out-of-band communications channel to avoid tipping your hat to the threat actors that you're lighting up your incident response team. They will move forward in their playbook if you send an email to all of the users or if you message it in Teams or Slack, since they're likely reading your email at that point in time. Assume breach at all times is a good posture for security teams. Western Digital, for example, was trolled by their attackers. They were sending screenshots from the laptops of the incident response team to them saying, haha, we're watching you looking for us. Clearly, containment phase of incident response had not been achieved yet. Slides will be available immediately after you email me with the QR code, which comes up in, I think, 2 or 3 slides. Left of boom, one more bit. Review your cyber insurance policies and those of your customers for specific language on when they need to be informed. Some claims are not paid because they were not notified within the required time period. And of course, know which incident response firms are vetted and approved ahead of time by your policy. Don't go engage a DFIR firm that's not going to be considered approved and therefore paid from your policy. Check for nation state exclusion language, because if it's a sign that's a nation state, many of these policies say, we don't pay if it was a nation state. Shown here is an advertisement from a Dutch insurance company from circa 1900. And of course, left of boom, sign a DFIR, a digital forensics and incident response retainer now, and have it ready to go. So you just have to send an email and verify, okay, we're lighting it up boots on the ground. Let's get started. Incident response. Don't expect to handle the incident on your own. Your team is going to be busy enough dealing with irate customers, and your team has to provide information to the actual DFIR team. So spare your team so that they can be able to calmly and rationally deal with the rest of the circus that's going on. Unless, of course, they're fully trained and disciplined DFIR professionals. But I'm guessing MSPs and MSSPs don't actually have, a deep bench of DFIR professionals. So they might think they're helping, right? People that are responding from your team. But they could actually be destroying chain of custody evidence that's needed in a criminal prosecution, especially if it's an insider threat example. Right of boom. Do not power down the infected device. If you can isolate it from the network instead, simply unplug the network cable and turn off the Wi-Fi. Do not fire the person that clicked or, the CISO. Engage outside counsel. Notify law enforcement. Contact your insurance carrier. Follow your WISP. Document your actions and decisions as you go. There's lots of details that are in the forensics image capture of the memory of the device. And if you power it off, you're throwing away insights as to who got in and how and why. And have empathy for your colleagues and your clients. You and they, like I said, can't fire yourself to a more secure posture. Write a boom, review contract language of your customer notification requirements. Light up your out-of-band communications channel. Resist the temptation to exit the containment phase early in the incident response. Preserve evidence, tamper-proof, in order to maintain chain of custody, aka read-only mode on a hard drive, shift off to a DFIR firm. You can clone the drive and then resume the laptop to service, but they need to make that forensic read-only copy. Over-communicate incident status several times per day to appropriate channels. Encourage your clients to set up status dots, fill in the domain name here, hosted by a third party, because if your site goes down, then your status page goes down. And in case your website's impacted, right? Social media channels, you can then communicate links to the status updates. This is a best practice. Too many companies fail to own the narrative, like I said, and their investors and customers and community at large start to lose trust. Make sure only official statements are published, and the employees are reminded to refrain from making statements either to the press or indirectly for their own personal social media accounts. Transparency and clear communication builds trust and confidence during these challenging times. And then, of course, tag team the IRT members, the incident response team. Tag out the first responders after a dozen hours of attention to an incident. They're going to beg you to stay up 24, 48 hours. And you're going to say, no, go home, get some rest, walk the dog, have a meal. This is an important part of resilience. This is an important part of surviving these things. The first 12 hours, okay, but then it could be weeks, it could be months that this incident is going to continue until you get to the other side of it. So buckle up for a long haul ahead and don't burn out the team. So here's the QR code and contact information. I have reached the end of the prepared statements, and we have a couple of minutes to go through some of the questions. So let me back up and see what we got. Let's see. Are Mike slides updating in time? They're at the March 12 timeline. Slight delay. Okay. Hi, Mike's MSPs normally assist companies with technical controls to protect and mitigate against ransomware. What kind of administrative controls and process should we be encouraging our customers to think about? Well, the controls and processes are well documented in all sorts of documents from NIST, for example. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 just came out, and it has a sixth category called govern, and that's what we're talking about, right? The govern part is not the tools part. And the controls are going to be, do you have meeting minutes that show that the board even talks about cybersecurity? That shows governance. If you don't have meeting minutes that show that security was ever on the agenda, aka no one ever showed them the risk register and asked them to prioritize, what do you think these risks should be, solved? Again, it's above the CISO's pay grade to take those decisions on their own. So I think it's important for everyone to realize security is a word that is in some of our titles, but it is, of course, everyone's responsibility. And we need everyone to think like a security professional, developers, project managers, executives. So administrative controls, have a framework, adopt the framework, document your framework, use tools like Cynomi to make sure you have potentially multiple frameworks and compliance. If you're under HIPAA and PCI, you can do both, with the same tool. Answer one set of questions, get all the different reports and gaps identified. Stefan, further to Brian's question, if not embedded in the contracts between MSP and clients, how can we mitigate M&A situations? Well, it's a material change to the assets of the client, right? If they go from 500 endpoints to 1,500 endpoints, they have to report that change to you, and you get a chance to change structure, costs, tools. The acquired company might be using a different tool. Are you going to continue supporting two tools now, or are you going to merge them and put them all on one endpoint platform? So these are decisions that are material changes to the nature of your relationship. So think of that as just an uplift opportunity in your MSP contract. And of course, learning about the acquisition, you may not learn about it until it becomes public. They may not bring you in. Although I'm guessing they'll probably want you to assess, how good is the security of this company we're thinking of buying. But maybe they ask a third party to do that. But make sure you ask for a copy of all of those due diligence and discovery documents so you know what was surfaced during discovery once it becomes public. So hopefully that helps with some of the situations. Like I said, they complicate matters. Like you said, you get a lot of pushback. Often the acquired entities have no idea what it's like to be a little fish eaten by a big fish. And there could be a lot of risk just due to lack of documentation. So try to document as much risk as you can, go around as a security function or an IT function and just say, hey, are you aware of any gaping wounds in the company that we might want to pay attention to? Even if it's after the acquisition, where they feel they may be jeopardizing, right, the market price that they get for being acquired. At some point, they're going to want to come clean. People don't like to keep these things as dirty secrets. They want to have a policy of no surprises. They want to embrace and engage, making their life better, aka getting rid of risk. Michael Beck, how do you deal with security layer fatigue? In the past 10 years, we've gone from just AV to adding email security to adding EDR. Cost and complexity is daunting to non-technical clients. This is true. If you're migrating from like a break fix into a managed subscription offering, you need to double, if not triple, some of the things that you're charging for, right? You're not just showing up and swapping out a dead hard drive or a broken mouse, replacing toner cartridges, as I like to joke. That's the chief security officer for a lot of these clients of MSPs, right? It's the most senior technical person in the company who happens to be, like I said, the help desk support. You need to uplift through awareness and training. Sometimes it's helpful to bring in a virtual CISO to do a talk and talk about, what it's like to put on your big boy pants and to run, this infrastructure for your clients in a way that they're going to say, okay, I'm ready to pay more because I'm going to get more. And I know exactly what it is that you're going to do for me, because you're putting it into your contract, you're updating your 2024 package, that you're offering them, and they're going from maybe basic services to enhanced. And you need to get new skills, and you may need to outsource or partner with other companies to help deliver them, and have preferred vendor relationships, of course, with companies like CrowdStrike or SentinelOne or Microsoft to help implement these tools in a native way and not just bring in a disruptive outside third-party tool. Let's see, James, in this incident, the data was stolen. It was mostly unstructured data. Any attention in their WISP? What is a well-developed WISP? This is where ChatGPT is your friend. ChatGPT knows all the right words that should be inside of a modern SOC 2 compliant. And I use SOC 2 Type 2 as a really good baseline, or CIS, Center for Internet Security. These two are really good frameworks to adopt if you don't have one yet. They tell you what to do and also potentially in what order to do it. The Center for Internet Security top controls is 18 domains, 153 control questions, and it's divided into implementation group 1, implementation group 2, and implementation group 3. So every company under the sun should be doing IG1 controls. And then you migrate and tackle and prioritize when you're going to hit some of your gaps for IG2 controls. And then eventually you get the kitchen sink and you do all of them with IG3. So a well-developed WISP would be you've reached IG3 on CIS top controls, and you are at a maturity rating of like 2 or 3 on each of these controls. And let's see what else. Well, the slides, yep, you can email me. I'll send them to you. Unfortunately, we can thank the NCAA for the demise of second chances and learning from errors in our society. No matter the cause or fault, you leave or get fired after an incident. It could be true. I'm not sure why NCAA is being thanked here, but let's see. Are we getting a special discount on your book? No, the book's out of print. You can buy it, and I'll sign it for you if you want. But let's see what else. Here is a special NIST 2.0 link. Thank you. And how can we follow up? Well, here's my email address. Here's my LinkedIn. And you can, of course, reach out via to Cynomi by going to their website and talking to Rotem. I'm sure everyone, can click on this QR code. It's a mail to tag, and you will now be in touch with me. So thank you. I think we ran a couple minutes over, but you know how passionate I am about this. I love talking about security. I will stop my display and we will wrap it up.
Mike, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending. That was super interesting. Feel free to visit cynomi.com or contact Mike. You had his contact details right here to learn more about that specific incident, about how to prevent such things and how to handle them when they do happen. And feel free to contact us to learn more about VCISA, the VCISA platform. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day.
Thanks, everyone. Good luck. We're all in it together. Join your ISAC, create local sharing communities, read up on things, join Slack workspaces. There's all sorts of ways to make this a little more enjoyable. That's one of the reasons why I teach. I love sharing information and helping people stop bad things from happening. Thanks, Cynomi, for sponsoring this Lunch and Learn. Everyone, hopefully you finished your lunch and you're ready to go back to work or do something like walk the dog, which I have to do next. So cheers.
Thanks.